you can be a left-leaning person and be aware of all these kind of social issues that affect us without being fucking miserable all the time and feeling like you're, an evil person.
Stephen Bonnell, welcome to How the Light Gets In.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So you used to stream games on Twitch, and more recently, over the past few years, you went more into the arena of political commentary. Can you tell us what initiated this shift?
I'd been playing games on Justin TV, which would become Twitch TV, I think around 2013, from anywhere from, I think, around 2010, 2011, up to 2016. When the Trump stuff started to kick off, I saw all the conversations happening, and I thought I'd throw my hat in the ring and start having like political debates. I'd always been kind of like an argumentative debate type person, and I'd always had like a peripheral interest in politics. But then with the Trump stuff, obviously everybody started to feel very political online, and yeah, it felt natural to get involved.
Because there seemed to be a lot of sort of people who started off in the gaming community, so people like Vaush, people like Hasan Piker, I think even Milo Yiannopoulos at one point, and then went into the realm of political commentary and became quite successful. Do you think there's a certain set of skills or set of characteristics that, being successful in one of those communities makes you successful in the other?
Probably not. I think that the overlap is more likely that there's if you draw like a Venn diagram of like people interested in playing video games and then a Venn diagram of like online early political pundits, there's probably a lot of overlap because of the demographics. Like it skews pretty young, it skews fairly wealthy, it skews fairly white. So when you have all these things together, you're going to get a lot of overlap between people that are in both fields, I think. I'm of the opinion that most of the people that came from gaming had pretty bad political takes. When you're involved in like a thing that's peripheral to politics, then your entire political view ends up being informed by like one issue. So for a lot of people that came from the gaming space, it was like basically SJW and being anti-SJW, and that was like their entire worldview. So you get a lot of people coming out of the gaming space that were kind of like pro-Trump, just because they didn't like feminism, I guess. And by didn't like feminism, I mean they didn't like being told not to say slurs or not to be bigoted or whatever by the evil woke SJW people.
So how do you think someone like Hasan Piker became famous, or someone like Vaush? Do you think there was a specific political issue that defined them, or is that slightly different?
Well, I mean, technically they both came up through my community, but we were all kind of like very far left people on the internet, and there was like a wave of far right people, so I think that made each of us pretty unique. Vaush was pretty similar to me in that he was like a debate heavy left-leaning person, and besides me there was nobody else really doing that in 2016, 2017. And then Hasan kind of had the whole machinery of like the Young Turks behind him, and then he started to get more into political commentary, and then he kind of skewed more towards like the general progressive entertaining streamer kind of guy. And
with someone like Vaush, so you said he rose up through your community, I'm guessing through a series of debates maybe that he had with you, is that correct?
Yeah, kind of. Like he was a caller on my stream way back in, I want to say 2011, maybe 2012, and he did that for maybe 8 or 9 years. We'd hop on stream, we'd have an argument, and then he started a YouTube channel a few years ago, and then we did some more debates, and then eventually I tend to split apart from other political people because we can only be in each other's orbits for so long before we start to hate each other, I guess. Yeah.
So the people who become successful, so someone like Vaush who rose up through your community, what kind of characteristics do you think they possess that makes them so successful? Like what makes someone such a successful sort of Twitch streamer, but in the realm of political commentary?
Well, I mean, these things will change every year, right? Because the landscape evolves so dramatically. But back then, I would say it was willing to put in some effort to research, willing to have like sharp rhetorical skills, willing to be pretty edgy, and then inhabiting like a left-leaning political ideology. Those characteristics, again, besides me, were pretty rare. So I think there was a lot of hunger and thirst for it on the internet to see kind of like that group of people come up to fight against all of the kind of like the right-wing edgy people.
There's a sort of thought with a lot of people, especially in the more mainstream commentariat, which is that platforming people with too extreme opinions is actually legitimizing a certain form of opinion that we don't want to legitimize, and therefore we shouldn't allow that to happen. Yet you seem to take the opposite approach, which is you debate people who many would say would have quite extreme views from both sides of the aisle. So Nick Fuentes on the right, for example, and maybe communist on the left. Why do you go for that approach as opposed to the former approach?
For as long as we live in a democracy where every person has one vote, whether you're homeless or a billionaire or whatever, we have to trust citizens, I think, to be able to have complicated and challenging conversations. And this idea that we have to take, like, I can understand platforms saying like no racial slurs or something, like that's fair. But when we start like axing off entire parts of the ideological spectrum that we're not allowed to talk about, whether it's like COVID or vaccinations or election denial or whatever, it does really bad things, I think, to the discourse. It makes it so that people on the right feel unheard, which they should feel heard, even if I don't agree with them. It makes people on the left dumber because now they don't have any opportunity to kind of like sharpen their, I guess, blades fighting these types of opinions. And then it just kind of drives all of us into these further radicalized like echo chambers where nobody has any idea what's actually going on. Like anytime I see a person on the right and the left come together and talk now, they just, in their minds, they just have the most ridiculous caricatures of the other's opinions, and nobody even knows how to have a conversation anymore.
And do you think those caricatures have become worse over the past 10 or 20 years? Because people like to say that we live in a more politically tribal world. Some people push back against this, but do you think that's true? Do you think people's opinions of each other have become more caricatured over the past 5-10 years? And if so, what?
I would say over the past 5 years for sure.
Okay.
This is a hard one. Everybody suffers from a bit of recentism. Everybody feels like they're in the worst political timeline ever. I would say that the last 5 years has been unique because I think for the first time ever, we have the internet and we've got a lot of money and power behind pushing certain types of content to people that is basically having them view the same type of material over and over and over and over and over again. I don't think we've ever had a setup on the planet where you've got a profit incentive on a worldwide thing that encourages people to only consume one type of content. Like, I think if you go back like even 15, 20 years ago before the internet was as big, you still had to be somewhat grounded because you had neighbors, you had your local community, you see people at church, you see people at the union, you see people at school. But now you can have whatever insane opinion you have. You can go online and probably find a community of like 5,000 people that have it, regardless of how insane your opinion is. And I think that kind of thing is relatively unhealthy.
YouTube operates and for example, TikTok more and more appeals to a narrower attention span in some respects. And how do you think, if anything, does that affect the sorts of views that, does it make people more politically extreme? Does it affect the sorts of views people might have? Has it changed the political landscape? Do you think?
I think short form content is bad for a variety of reasons. That has to do with how we move through and enjoy life. Probably has a negative knock-on effect for political opinions as well, I'd imagine. Yeah. If I've only got 30 seconds to show you something, it's probably not going to be a detailed breakdown of a budget. It's probably just going to be the most sensational, emotionally loaded thing I can get you with because I've only got 30 seconds to hold your attention. So I imagine if you're incentivized to create extremely emotionally provocative content, it's probably going to be worse overall for a more nuanced political conversation. But I will say, I feel like we've always kind of tended towards more extremely provocative, emotionally evocative content, even in mainstream media. So, but I'm sure TikTok and everything accelerates that.
You do a lot of content, and it seems to have a lot of different themes to it. Some will be political commentary, some will be research streams, some will be arguments with other people. In coming up with ideas for your videos and coming up with themes for your videos, do you have a specific line that you take? Is there a way that you try to structure?
I think it's basically just whatever interests me at the time. Yeah, I have a really wide variety of interests, and then if something interesting pops up, we'll probably start diving into it. This works sometimes to my benefit, and then I can cover a lot of really unique topics that a lot of other people won't cover. Sometimes it works to my detriment because sometimes there's stuff that's maybe pretty important, but I super don't care about it. Like Trump did his last town hall, I think like a month ago for, I don't remember which news channel. I didn't even want to watch it because I've already heard everything Trump has to say over and over and over again. So obviously my audience wants me to watch it, but I'm like, I don't want to watch Trump do his 5-minute spiel again. Yeah.
Do you think he could win?
Trump?
Yep.
Could Trump win? I mean, I would have said absolutely not in 2016, and he did.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't think so. The reason why I would say no is because, one, he's already lost to Biden once, and it's not like as much as the Republicans say it, like the United States is doing pretty well, a lot better than we thought we'd be. We were expecting a huge recession. It didn't really happen. We thought inflation would stay forever. Didn't really happen. Some Republicans are waiting for a World War III. That hasn't happened yet, I guess. So I think Biden is doing a decent job. Trump already lost to him once. Republicans have made a really big deal out of the abortion thing, which I don't think is like a politically popular thing to do. And they've got a really bloody primary coming ahead of them. Yeah. So I feel like the Republicans are primed in a lot of negative ways for the upcoming election. But who knows?
Could you run down what you think the strengths and the weaknesses of this current Democrat administration, and specifically Biden?
For strengths, I mean, legislatively, like I think in the first year or two, I think people would have said that Biden accomplished more than anybody thought he'd ever be able to do. So legislatively, the administration is very strong. I would argue that foreign policy-wise, I think it's fairly strong. Some people were unhappy that the Afghanistan pullout wasn't as nice as it could have gone, but at least we're out. And I'll give him major props to that. Trump said he would get us out. He pushed it off until the next election. So, I mean, at least we're out of Afghanistan. And I think the United States has done a really good job at taking leadership on the Ukraine issue with Russia. But then that's contentious among people on the very far left and then a lot of people on the right. So, yeah. And then also there were like early day successes as well. Like I think we buoyed the economy pretty well for COVID. He got the 100 million vaccinations in like half the time he said he would. Even though maybe that's not 100%, Biden's credit. But in terms of like on leadership, I think that he has the demeanor of a president, which is nice to not have to look at Twitter to see what my fucking leader is saying every day in the world stage. Foreign policy-wise, he has a respectable foreign policy. He's not like doing crazy stuff all the time. No photo ops with insane people. In terms of cons, I mean, the age is going to be a big one. I mean, you watch him talking about Bosnia 20, 30 years ago, and you compare that to today, it definitely is slowing down a bit. Sometimes I wonder if he's a little bit too milquetoast. Like, I kind of wonder, I look at Biden, in my opinion, I feel like Biden he's pretty hard to hate because he's not like that polarizing, but he's also really hard to like get behind because he's not like that exciting, whereas Obama was a person that the Republicans love to hate and the Democrats love to love. Biden is just kind of there. I think he does a good job, but in kind of a boring way, so people don't care as much. So I think cons it literally comes down to, I guess, like energy. And it feels kind of dumb to say that, but I kind of wonder sometimes if some of the elections might be decided basically exactly on that.
Sure. And you said something earlier, which I'd quite like to come back to and link to this conversation, which is there are some issues where the left have become dumber on those issues, i.e. a sort of complacency because people haven't come together and argued or had to defend those issues. A sort of similar thing to what George Orwell said, which is that if he'd encountered a flat earther, he probably wouldn't be able to win the argument because he didn't know the counter arguments to that.
Wait, who said that?
George Orwell.
Oh, okay. I say the same thing. He copied me, I think. Yeah.
But go back to that. What specific issues do you think that applies to most today?
On everything. Every single social issue.
Right.
In the United States, Democrats are arguing, no, hold on, I need to be careful when I say this, where the political distribution of people in the United States right now is very strange. If you go online, progressives basically run everything.
Yeah.
But in the real world, progressives are a minority of the Democratic voting bloc, and they have almost no political power. But they seem to be very active culturally and in like schools and everything. The progressives kind of like have the reins on all the social issues, but I feel like they're running farther and farther away from where people are at organically in the conversation. Like if you talk to a progressive, they would tell you that like the debate today needs to be whether or not like a 4-year-old can be considered trans. And in the United States, I don't even know if the normal voter has completely bought into anybody being trans yet. Like my guess is probably 30 to 40% of Americans don't even believe that transness is like a real thing at all. The Republicans have made like trans issues the focal point, I guess, of the past like year and a half of all of their policies, of all of their talking points. Of like, I feel like every single day I go on Twitter, there's like 7 guys from the Daily Wire talking about Leah Thomas or some trans issue or some culture wars thing related to trans stuff or another book in a school. I feel like more specifically, just I guess I feel like progressives, when they go to argue about a lot of these niche social issues, there's very little understanding, very little compassion, very little empathy. If they run into somebody that disagrees with them, they basically immediately write them off as like a racist, a bigot, a sexist, a fascist, and then they don't really have the ability to even engage in that conversation. So far it's been okay because the Trump disaster in the Republican Party is kind of inhibited them from making like good political gains. But if the Republicans get back on their feet again, if DeSantis provides good leadership, or if God forbid Trump figures his shit out and he comes back, I think that culturally the progressives have put the Democratic Party in a really weird spot. Like for instance, in 2022, we did really good in the elections. I think a lot of it had to do with abortion and Trump's bad leadership. But like earlier than that, the BLM riots and the push for socialism and the all cops are bastards rhetoric from the progressives, even though they're a minority of the party, really hurt a lot of mainstream Democrats in their elections. So
Matt Walsh recently made a documentary in which he essentially went round asking a load of professors and people on the street, what is a woman? If he were on a debate panel with you and you were debating him and he just came to you with that question, how would you answer that question, or how do you think someone should answer that question?
It's a really difficult one. So the reality is one of the most important faculties that humans develop that is unique from every other animal on the planet. Regardless of what a vegan will tell you, humans are the only creature on the planet that have a sophisticated capacity for abstract thought and language. Language that goes beyond just I bark and you come. But in terms of being able to communicate, like I can communicate a negative to you, I can tell you something is not there, I can communicate something at a future time and date in another area. These types of things that humans have for language is incredibly complicated. Language is one of those things that we learn when we're 1 year old and we never think about it again, but it is so unbelievably complicated in terms of how we use language. Personally, for me, and there are tons of writers, Victor Zizek probably is going to have strong opinions on this. For me personally, as an uneducated whatever, when I think of language or I think of words, I think of we say a word, and when we say that word, you kind of invoke this family of concepts around the word, and they light up stronger or weaker depending on what you're talking about. So depending on how cheeky you want to be, if somebody asks you, like, what is a woman, right, you want to have a strong answer. But the reality is that these are really complicated things. For instance, even on a simple thing, if I ask you, like, what is a chair? You're not going to really give me a strong answer. It could have 4 legs, it could have 3 legs, it could be made of a soft material, it could be made of hard material, it could be like a big beanie bag, right? The reality is that when we say chair, it invokes kind of this family of concepts. And I think the same is true for women as well. If you want to talk like biology, if you want to talk chromosomes, like these are all things that are loosely associated with women, that's true. However, when we're existing in public and we identify like a man or a woman, we do that without seeing the chromosomes, without seeing the genitals, without any sort of, with very few biological indicators. Sometimes we'll just do it on clothes or like voice, right? We can identify online people as men or women. So I actually really liked, if you watch that documentary, there were a lot of good answers given by a lot of different people. I thought Jordan Peterson actually had some good answers. Now, when they play his answer in the documentary, they've got like the serious music and Matt Walsh is coming to him for the answer, so it seems like he's saying something reasonable. But his answer is really just as kind of loose as everybody else's. I think the final thing he says to Matt Walsh is like, so how do I find out what a woman is? And Jordan Peterson's like, well, why don't you marry one and find out, Which is kind of how we discover everything in life and in language, is it's like that family of concepts, and you just keep associating with it, and then you refine and you iterate on that family of concepts as you add and remove qualities based on what a woman is or what a woman isn't. People with long hair, people with smooth skin, people blah 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 blah. Yeah.
There's often this view, I think, particularly from the left, that look, cultural issues aren't particularly important because they don't really affect people in material ways, whereas sort of economic policy, things like that, actually do. Do you think that's a fair argument, or do you think people are missing something when they say, cultural issues aren't really important, this is just some kind of inane distraction?
Yeah, so they're called meat and potatoes issues.
Right.
And it's something that the middle class and wealthier people have no understanding of. And what happens is I think a bunch of affluent people will get in a room together and they'll say, poor people don't care about these stupid social issues, they want to make more money. That is absolutely not true. There are people that will vote away every dollar and food stamps and everything on certain social issues like abortion, right? There are certain social issues that will drive every strata of society.
What do you think that is?
Like stuff related to children is going to be a really big one. Stuff related to abortion is a massive one in the United States. LGBT issues can be a big one, but yeah, this is a mistake that I don't think they make the same mistakes anymore, but political pundits or political pollsters and politicians used to make the mistake that like, oh, poor people just care about meat and potatoes issues. They don't care about social issues, but that's absolutely not true. Sometimes poor people care about social issues more than wealthier people because they've got less of a stake even in kind of the whole like wealth game, I would argue, actually, I was just on that topic even for Brexit. I feel like Brexit was largely driven by social issues, especially immigration, I think. Even though some people will try to talk around and say it was financial or say it was economic, it doesn't feel that way. I don't think so. When I look at the rhetoric and I look at the sentiment that was driving Brexit actually happening.
But something else on cultural issues that I wanted to ask you about. So Jordan Peterson, since 2016, has become very famous around this idea. A lot of it's putting forward gender roles. You've been very critical of the way in which he discusses gender roles well. You know, the idea that men operate within a dominance hierarchy and they're trying to work their way up that dominance hierarchy. And what do you think of that whole thing?
My issue with Jordan Peterson is that, like, I'll agree with most of what he says on a descriptive level. Like, I think it's important to recognize differences between men and women. They're real, they exist, obviously. And there's different ways that men and women function in society. But I think that sometimes we make the mistake in society of we'll look at men and women where they are, and we'll assume that they could only ever be there because of our biological differences, and then we ignore the massive social drivers that we have that push us deeper into those fields. So, like, in my opinion, in a totally equitable world, totally equal, everybody has the same opportunity, same upbringing, blah, blah, blah. I think even in that world, you'd still see men and women choosing differently based on the profession, but you're not going to see like 90% of men and 10% of women in some areas. It's going to be like 55-45, or maybe a little bit larger, maybe a little bit smaller, depending on the area. But I feel like sometimes we make this mistake of like, well, women have always done this, so they'll never want to do this in the future. And I think that, at least in the United States, keep in mind when I speak, I'm always speaking U.S. social issues, so it might be slightly different in other parts of the world. But the United States, I think access to the workplace and access to birth control has like fundamentally altered women's relationship with society in ways that I don't think anybody would have ever believed. Nobody would have thought that like women could outperform men in math, for instance, because boys play with toys and women play with Barbie dolls, and women are more social and boys are more abstract and discrete in numbers and blah, blah. But we were starting to see for education that wasn't the case, right? Or the idea that, oh, women don't enjoy recreational sex, they'll never do that, that's horrible, women are the gatekeepers and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, I don't know, with access to birth control, and they have the ability to have recreational sex without getting pregnant all the time, it seems like some of them do enjoy recreational sex. And so the scary thing about people like Jordan Peterson is sometimes he'll come in with these just so stories. He'll say, well, women are like this and men are like this, and because of this biologically, these things are never going to change. And it's like, some of these things might change, and I think we need to be a little bit more receptive or understanding of where those changes are going to happen so that we can be ready for it in the future.
And you've debated quite a few people who are fans of Andrew Tate or within that category. And there are people like on the Fresh and Fit podcast. Where do you think all that comes from? And do you think it's linked to any of the Jordan Peterson stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've made really good strides in society bolstering a lot of different types of minorities. So be it women or people of color or LGBT people. But it always feels like on the backs of all those movements, we always have to make sure everybody knows how much we hate white people or we want to kick down on men or whatever. And I think that when you do this for year after year after year over a decade, you get this kind of growing sentiment of young white guys, or even young men in general, who just kind of feel left out, or they feel like they don't have figures to look up to, or they feel like they're constantly being told they're not good, they're toxic, et cetera, all the time. And when that happens, you get this hunger from that group of people to find figures to look towards. Jordan Peterson filled that role originally, and now it's like all these red pill spaces and Andrew Tate that are kind of exploding and filling that new void. And
what's the best way you find of disarming a lot of their arguments?
I mean, it really depends on the person. I mean, none of their arguments are based in very good data, so if somebody wants to sit down and actually go through studies, that could be a good way to do it. A lot of the time, I think what people really need to see on that side is people want to be happy and enjoy life. And sometimes on the left, it's really fucking hard to do that, right? So if I look on the right and I see Andrew Tate, like, what's Andrew Tate telling me? He's telling me, buy a sword, be the master of your own destiny, go get, work, get Bugattis, get bitches, do all this stuff. It's like, okay, well, if I go to the left, what are they telling me? It's like, well, you need to feel bad because you're white and you're systemically oppressing everybody and capitalism is evil and you're privileged and everything you do is just because of your mom and dad. It's like, okay, well, fuck me, right? I feel like the left comes down on you so hard and it makes you feel like shit for everything in society. Like, oh, those shoes, those were made by in a slave shop, or oh, that food that you bought, the person is a victim of capitalism and they probably don't have a pension. And it's like, okay. And then on the right, like, you get like all these people that feel really empowering, they drive you further and further. So I feel like on the left, oftentimes I feel like my important role is to show that, like, hey, I'm here, I've got a lot of really progressive beliefs, but I'm a happy person, I live a fun life, like, I make money, I don't think that any of this is evil. And yeah, having like more figures like that, I think would be really important to show that you're not demonizing success and that you can be a left-leaning person and be aware of all these kind of social issues that affect us without being fucking miserable all the time and feeling like you're, an evil person.
Who have you found the most intellectually impressive or formidable person you've debated?
The problem is that if you're part of an ideological movement, the debate is going to never feel that fun because chances are you're captive to that audience and you're never going to change, right? Like if you're literally like, your name is like Red Pill Rolo or Red Pill Creator, right? Like you're never going to be like, oh, that's a good point. Maybe women aren't like evil divorce monsters, you know? Like you're not going to admit that because you're going to lose half your audience doing it. Honestly, I think some of my best debates are probably just people in my community that I pull on to have conversations with. There's a few well-known members of my community that just jump into my Discord to argue with me. I think those are the most fun because these are people that don't have strong attachments to any like political groups or ideologies, so they have a lot more flexibility to kind of like grow and change and like give me new and interesting ideas. Whereas on a lot of these online political spaces, you honestly, God, you hear like the same 4 or 5 fucking figures every single day from these people. It might be about trans kids or some person in a bathroom or a trans athlete or whatever. You hear this for like a year. Or in Red Pill space, it's like 80% of women initiate divorce and men are supposed to do this and women do that. And it's like the same thing every single day. So yeah, people that are less ideologically aligned, in my personal opinion, are more fun to argue with because they have more flexibility and room to grow. And they provide like a more unique perspective to argue against.
And are there any issues that they've changed your mind on?
Yeah, I've changed my mind on a ton of things over the years. I don't know if I've had any major shifts in opinion recently. The last big one I had was probably being persuaded away from the Citizens United thing. In the United States, it had to do with campaign finance. I used to think it was a really big deal. Now I don't think it's that big of a deal at all. I guess for Ukraine, before the invasion, I never thought it would happen. And I kind of didn't care much about the Ukrainian issues. But then once the invasion happened, I did like 2 weeks of pretty hardcore research and got a lot more information there. But I guess it wasn't a big like changing of the mind. Yeah. Yeah, I've been pretty ideologically stable, but I've also, the past year has been like me fighting red pillars a ton, so nobody's convinced me to hate women yet, I guess, so I haven't really changed much there.
Great. Stephen Bonnell, thank you very much.
Thank you.